Intro, we're gonna start.
Okay.
Let's see here. All right. All right, everybody. This is the Unheard Outsider. I'm your host, Q. And we are back this week to discuss an amazing topic. And one of the topics that we are discussing this week is the importance of voting and voter suppression. And today, we have my awesome mentor, brother, home skillet biscuit, Dr. Derrick Williams. And so I want to welcome him into the room. And so, Dr. Williams, I just really want you to, or I just call him Doc, is doing to welcome you into the room. But also, I just want to, first off, let folks know, a little bit more about yourself as far as your educational background, where you grew up, and what brought you to the academic side of the theory and practice component.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you, Quinn Q, my home skillet, my little brother from another mother.
Yeah.
Quinn, I just want to make sure I broadcast this quite often, but I wanted to make sure that you hear it and anybody that hears this podcast of how incredibly proud I am of you as this incredible intellectual on the ground activist that is doing extraordinary work. And I can't tell you enough how gracious I want to be, just how proud I am of you, Quinn, for what you have done, your journey. Your journey is incredibly powerful, brother. I hope you put that on paper because it will help so many outsiders within, just to play on that because I consider myself definitely an outsider. And I'm just glad that you have created this platform to give voice to so many individuals, especially, Quinn, during this time or during the time of this pandemic, man. We are about 2 weeks upon the election. And I know that's going to be our conversation today, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew how proud I am of you as just this incredible young person that is just doing incredible work.
Thank you. No, it means a lot. It's definitely, it means a lot. And, it's, my journey, and so exactly all the things that I've been through in higher ed and just academic. So it means a lot. You mean the world to me. And, a lot of people don't know, you were one of literally the first Black men that really accepted me in my full authenticness. And I appreciate that. So, it goes both ways. It's nothing but love. I'm proud of you too. So I just, we could say this all day. You already know.
That's right, Q.
Thank
you so much, Q. I'm humble. I'm humble, little brother. So, Q, I'll give the listening audience a little background about myself real quick and kind of my journey. I consider myself, Q, I call myself a blue-collar scholar. It's kind of the name that I go by. And I always introduce myself as an activist academic. I know a lot of academics in academia, they have those two words flipped. They have academic activists, but I want the audience and everybody to know, Q, as you know, that my activism is what informs me. And my journey is, my journey has been quite a journey as well. I consider myself a communication specialist. I have expertise in college student programming development. I served at Southern Illinois, which I'll talk a little bit about. I served at Southern Illinois in several institutions that dealt with student programming and development in the student affairs. I worked as a violence prevention coordinator in the Student Health Center at Southern Illinois. I worked as the coordinator of the Black Resource Center, and then I also worked as a assistant director for what was then called the Center for Inclusive Excellence at Southern Illinois University. And that was a diversity type of center that had the women's, the LGBTQ, Latinx, and the Black Resource Center housed underneath it. And I served in that capacity for about 3 years before I migrated to Cleveland, where I'm currently a professor, a full professor at Cuyahoga Community College, which is the community college that is located in Cleveland. There are 4 campuses. I work at the one downtown. And I strategically picked working at the Metro campus because, as I'll get into, Q, there's a connection between myself and Cleveland. Cleveland is 49% has a Black population. Mm-hmm. So I'm at the height of where I want to be as far as the student I want to teach. So that's a little bit about what I've done, Q. I'm as you know, Q, I'm inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King. Mm-hmm. While growing up, I grew up in a little small coal mining town called Graysville. And that was just outside of Birmingham, Alabama, where Dr. King did most of his work. So I was literally born to a little over a decade after those 4 little girls in 1963 were killed in the Birmingham bombing. I was born in that city in an integrated hospital. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the power of what Dr. King stood for and voting and the likes. And I'm a first generation college student. And my journey, Q, was a struggle. I struggled I struggled a lot in high school. I barely graduated high school. You know, I was the typical football player down in Alabama football. It's king, queen, and I didn't take my studies seriously. And that caused me to barely graduate. I think I barely graduated on time because of our loving aunt, my Aunt Cora. She actually got me through. So I graduated there too, and I had a chance. I still wanted to play sports, so I migrated up to Iowa, to this little small community college called Iowa Lakes Community College. And I know, Q, you went to Mankato, Minnesota State. It's pretty close to there, where you went to receive your master's degree. Yeah. So I went to community college there, and then I would go on to get my bachelor's degree, master's degree, University of Northern Iowa, and then I worked a little bit in the Waterloo area. That's Waterloo, Cedar Falls. That's where Northern Iowa was located. And I worked as a community interventionist. And my role was with an organization called the Family Service League. And my role was just to be out in the community doing workshops, community organizing around the issue of violence, in particular gender violence. And the University of Northern Iowa, they actually hired me to be the first coordinator of their anti-violence men's group. It was called Mentors in Violence Prevention. So I did that for 2 years while working with the Family Service League. And the Family Service League had a battered women and children shelter. I worked there as a child advocate. And then, too, I wanted to go on and pursue the PhD, and that's what brought me to SIU. One of my mentors at Northern Iowa had finished her degree at SIU, and that's how I got linked at SIU. Went to SIU. I studied communication studies. I got my PhD there, and my research combines critical theory, gender studies, progressive masculinities, mentoring, grassroots organized. And when I was there, I was able to teach in multiple departments from the women, gender, and sexuality, Black American studies, the student health, education, and communication studies. So I was always able to teach while work at SIU, and which has brought me full circle to being here in Cleveland.
Wow. So this is why he's my big brother. Just want y'all to know that, like seriously, like hands down, there's just so much respect, and it's also really good to just connect with someone who just gets you, and Doc knows my journey of higher ed and school and how a lot of our experiences have overlapped. It's like crazy. So,
Absolutely.
and it's just powerful too. And I'm happy that we're kind of, going into this conversation that we're talking about, as far as, the importance of voting and things like that. I really would love to hear from you. Just why is it important to vote? Especially when we are, or some of us feel like we just are not so connected or don't really trust our own democracy. Especially during these times, it's really important. So I really would love to get your perspective and your insight on why is it important to vote, and also just taking us down this lane of like voter suppression. So I'll let you just do your thing.
Okay, absolutely. So I want to answer that, Q, in two separate kind of ways.
Yes.
I'll tackle the voter suppression and why it's important. But first, I would be remiss to not say that America. We talk about America being a democracy, and when I talk about voter suppression and all of those things, we'll see that as Dr. Martin Luther King so adamantly challenged America until his dying day. He said, just be true what you say you are on paper. We know that in 1776, they're called founders, where you had all of these white property owners, men coming together with no women in the room, with no people of color, wasn't any black folk there, and they were designing this Declaration of Independence, what we know as the Constitution. Now, here's the like caveat of this, and this is why Q, I have this question in this kind of dichotomous kind of way, because America is a paradox when we talk about democracy. So here you had these framers coming together to profess the independence of America from England, and to write, if you read the Constitution, Q, it'll make you start crying. It's so beautifully written that everyone has these inalienable rights, and the problem with that is that the framers and the people who was writing that actually held human beings in bondage. So that's where the conflict comes in pursuit. So we had people declaring freedom, but at the same time denying freedom. And when we think of this, Q, in the essence of voting, America has always been what we call a great compromise. And when we're talking about voting and voting rights and voting suppression, we're looking at the great compromise. So to bring us up to date, and we know that about half of the American population don't vote. And it's really easy for some kind of highbrow person to point and say, hey, what's wrong with these individuals? They need to vote. And we hear the line that people have died for the vote. But one thing that we need to understand is that a lot of these people have lost hope. A lot of these people don't see anything to vote for. A lot of these people have heard over and over that politics will change their lives. And they've heard that, Quinn, and they're just at a crossroads now. They're not seeing any material reality come about through these elections. We keep hearing the same type of things of, well, you have to vote for the lesser of two evils. That's a really good, interesting concept there. And it's interesting for the sense of voting is an exchange. And people aren't seeing the exchange. They're not seeing their conditions. They're not seeing their neighborhoods. They're not seeing things in their material life come to fruition. So this exchange and this expectation that people should vote just by this notion of that's what you're supposed to do, Q. People are saying, well, I need something to vote for. And that's one of the things that I want to turn this conversation, that when people say that individuals need to vote, Q, we need to ask people, what is it that they can vote for, opposed to just assuming that you have my vote and you should vote just because of this kind of historical thing. Now, that's one thing, Q. I had to tackle that, Q.
Yeah.
I had to tackle it, Q. I had to, because we're telling our millennials, we're telling them to vote, but a lot of our millennials, a lot of the millennials are asking some very fundamental questions about America. We are a generation that is inheriting America that is not better than our parents. And we're the first generation that's doing this, Q. Because the baby boomers, I'm part of Generation X, baby boomers, silent, greatest generation. They all got an America that was better off than their parents lived in. This isn't true for a lot of millennials. For a lot of millennials, and people feel disenfranchised. So let's take that first cue, that a lot of people are disenfranchised based on both political parties. We live in these two main political parties are not offering tangible solutions to get people excited to the polls and those different types of things. So that's one thing. Okay. Now, Q, let's cover how individuals who are voting, individuals who are going to the polls, and we're going to talk about the suppression of this. And Q, we got to go back if we're going to talk about this. I talked about the frame of 1776. There were certain clauses put in the Constitution, certain clauses. One was 1850. It was called the Fugitive Slave Act. And that was an act into Congress where it was so many enslaved people running for freedom in the northern states. The Southern Congress, Southern Senate, all of these individuals wanted some type of measure. And again, we start to see this compromise come to play. And we begin to see the Southern, and at that time too, they were the Democratic Party. It was the Southern Democratic Party. And what happened is that the North struck a deal with the South through this Fugitive Slave Act. Now, I want to bring this up further. There's another clause, and it's called the 3/5 clause. And a lot of people, when they hear this, Q, they say, oh, that means that black individuals were only seen as 3/5 of an individual. That's not actually true, Q. The South would have loved to be able to count all of their enslaved individuals to actually vote. So what this was a North measure to try to stop the slave from having that political power. Now, we're just talking about suppression here, not you. Yep. So when we move this up, that's that 3/5 clause. That was in there. And that was, again, to stop the southern states from having a majority. Because if you counted the enslaved people as one individual, then the slave states, and we know the Confederate states, Alabama, my home country, hometown, Mississippi, all of those states would have been able to get more senators, more Congress people, and more representatives. So, Q, we got to understand that history there, right?
Yeah.
Now, Q, we have to take it to the Civil War, because on the eve of the Civil War, we begin to see this outbreak. And the Civil War was led up by radical abolitionists, but more importantly, enslaved individuals.
Yeah.
Enslaved individuals would go up, cross the Ohio River, and gain that freedom. There were so many people running away, going back to that Fugitive Slave Clause Act of 1850, that led to the Civil War. We see the Civil War start to break out in the 1861. We started to see it.
Yep.
And then we get to 1865. So I want the listeners to put a pin in the year 1865, April, and we're talking about Appomattox. General Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant, who was the Northern general. And we begin to see the end of the Civil War. Now, this is important when we talk about the context of voting.
Yep.
Now, after 1965, roughly around 1867 to 1877, you had where the country tried to come together to formulate this thing known as Reconstruction. Reconstruction was the attempt from 1865 to about 1877. It was the attempt of America to exercise the right that was granted in 1776, that Constitution, to delegate that towards their black citizens. Now, this was carried out in the Congress, and I'm glad that I'm in Ohio, because I'm in a sacred place in Ohio. The Ohio River. Ohio was a great underground railroad state, but also Ohio had some of the most progressive Congress people. A guy by the name of Benjamin Wade, a guy by the name of James Ashley. These were congressmen in partnership with Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner. These were radical, progressive white men who said, wait 1 minute, you can't free 4.5 million individuals and not give them rights, not give them property, and not give them wealth. Sherman, when he marched down in Atlanta, he gave order number 15. And that was called 40 acres and a mule. So each individual free was guaranteed 40 acres and a mule. So the Reconstruction was designed to implement that 40 acres and a mule. So this is what happened, Quentin, to get us to voting suppression.
Yeah.
And why we got to understand this from a historical context.
Mm-hmm.
So there were 3 amendments passed, and these 3 amendments are very important, Q. And you probably have heard of these 3 amendments, Q. And these 3 amendments were known as the Reconstruction Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was to actually an amendment found in the Constitution that said that all persons are free. Now, here's the catch, Q. Except for servitude or servitude for a crime. And Q, I want our listeners to remember that, because that was a clause that we're going to see even here today in Florida, where we see voter disenfranchisement today of people who have been convicted. We'll come back to that, Q. So that was to free. The 14th Amendment, Q, was to found what they call civil rights to give this 4.5 million individual civil rights. Now, here is the 15th Amendment, Q, and a congressperson by the name of John Bingham. He's from Ohio. He constituted this, and it is a beautiful document. In the document, Q, in the document, he says this, Q. I want to read the 15th Amendment, Section 1, because this gets us to the voter suppression. So this is what John Bingham actually said here, Q. So this is the 15th Amendment, Section 1. And it goes like this, and this was passed. It says, the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. Now, Q, this amendment is one of the most important civil rights amendments that has come to bear, the 14th and the 15th. The 14th, John Bingham, even when we look at same-sex marriages, they go back to this amendment. So this amendment is still fighting the right to this day for marginalized individuals, Black, Latino, you name it. So why I talk about that, Q, is that this amendment, this 15th Amendment, gave individuals the right to vote. Now, I didn't give everybody, Q, because we got to be intersectionalists here. While this 15th, because they called it a fight for 15th, and some of the women such as Elizabeth Susan B. Anthony fought for this because they were what they consider like feminist abolitionists as well. And what happened here is that the amendment was passed where it granted Black men the right to vote, but not afforded women. And that was a fight between Frederick Douglass, who was a progressive man during that time, and Elizabeth Canden and Susan B. Anthony. They some ugly things occurred. So what happened out of that, Q, is that for the first time, Black citizens, men, we gotta put that pin in that. It was an asterisk there because it wasn't Black women. Black men could actually exercise their right to vote. Now, Q, I'm gonna go back to this amendment and then I'm gonna bring us forward to where we're at today and any questions you'll have for me. So in that amendment, Q, it said that no one, it says the United States shall not deny or abridge any or any state. John Bingham and Thaddeus Stevenson, they fought really hard to use that word state. Because, Q, you're going to hear me talk about things when we talk about voters disenfranchised. You're going to hear this word, which we call dog whistle politics. That's a word coded state rights. So this amendment said that no state shall abridge, meaning that Q, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, all of those tactics that they have done does not trump your citizenship of being an American citizen to vote. Now, Q, we got to deal with this Reconstruction stuff, and I got to go back to Ohio because this is a moment in Ohio history that I'm not proud of. Now, the president after Reconstruction or during Reconstruction, we're going to say 1877, Q. That was a huge election. And the reason why that was a huge election, Q, because it was a compromise made. Now, think about it, Q. We've been talking about compromise from the founders, those southern state people in 1776. Said, we're not going to sign this Constitution unless the North okay our slave power. All right? Now we're going so then we see this compromise. We've seen the compromise. So we're in 1877, Q. And then there's another compromise. The Southern Democrats former slave-holding institution, Power State, Q, they made a deal with an Ohio president. Now, Q, I'm in Ohio, and Ohio has produced the most presidents of any other state. And they produced a president by the name of Rutherford B. Hayes. And President Hayes struck a deal with the Southern Democratic Party at that time, who was slave state powered. He was a Republican. And what he did, Quentin, after the Civil War, the South was defeated, and the North, you had Northern soldiers there to oversee the Reconstruction. So what Hayes did, he withdrew all of the Union soldiers, and he based in 1877, and he basically left the South to do whatever they wanted to do. Now, Q, here is where the chaos begins. And the chaos begins based on everything that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Voter suppression, voters' rights. So terror was unleashed, Q, in 1877 because a General Robert E. Lee, had another general. His name was Nathan Bedford Forrest, Q. And Nathan Bedford Forrest, Q, was a vicious, murdering Confederate general. I got to put this in here because we got to have a context for this, Q.
Yes.
Nathan Forrest, during the Civil War, Q, Nathan Forrest had a battle in Tennessee. It's called Fort Pillow, and it was named after the river there in Tennessee. And the way that the North won the war is because of so many black volunteers, black men volunteered service to be in. It was the turning tide of the Civil War.
Okay.
So it was one battle that pursued where these black Union soldiers, Q, here's another thing. 1 out of 2, half of the soldiers during the Civil War actually surrendered. A lot of people don't know that. Nathan Bedford Forrest actually surrendered. But get this, Q. In a battle with black soldiers, Nathan Bedford Forrest took his Confederate army, and the Union, they got trapped, and they had a poor commanding general that was leading these what they call them, the colored troops at that time. And what happened is that Nathan Bedford Forrest and his soldiers, when the black Union soldiers actually put their hands up to retreat, they didn't honor that because they saw them as enslaved property. So what they did they gruesomely slaughtered over 100 black Union soldiers, and it was so gruesome, Q, that some of the soldiers, they were wounded, and they just like collapsed in the river. They were just trying to get away any kind of way. It was like brutal, Q. And what they said is that Fort Pillow, the river there, Q, was turned red in blood. Now let's bring this back up to 1877. So Nathan Bedford Forrest surrendered in Gainesville, Alabama. That's interesting, Q, because my granddad is from that city. And when he retires, Q, he's not captured. He's left to go back down south, where he continued this thing that we know now, Q, known as convict leasing. He was one of the architects of that. Now, Q, that's not all that he did. The other thing he did, Q, he was the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And Bedford Forrest, along with the ex-Confederate soldiers, after Rutherford B. Hayes actually withdrew the Union troops, actually allowed the Ku Klux Klan, which we call the first generation of Ku Klux Klan, Nathan Bedford Forrest, all of these ex-Confederate soldiers. Now, Q, we gotta connect these parallels.
Yes.
We're starting to see these militias show up at the State House talking about kidnapping people. Q, It's interesting now. So, Q, what they did, they created terror. They created terror in the South, and they actually slaughtered. In Q, we would be here for days if I just listed all of the executions, the lynching, and the things that they actually did.
Oh yeah.
As the Ku Klux Klan. But Q, I want to point the direction to something that gets us to voter suppression. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Eufaula, Alabama, is a place, and in 1874, Q, this was during the Reconstruction when the 15th Amendment was passed and those things. November 3rd, Q, and we know we vote on the first week of in November, but on November 3rd, Q, 1874, black men primarily were so happy to get that 15th Amendment to vote. So, Q, they went to vote, and this is what happened to them, Q. During a statewide election in Alabama, deadly riots occurred in Eufaula, Spring Hill, Alabama. As a result, the tension brought about Reconstruction era. So this is what happened, Q. On the day that they went to vote in Eufaula, what happened was there were these Eufaula Democrats, and these were ex-Confederate soldiers who set up shop on the roof of the city town hall. And when the individuals walked up to actually vote on the election eve, there were actually more than 1,000 people, black individuals, ready to actually cast their vote. And what happened, Q, is when they walked into the town, they were slaughtered. They were actually killed and slaughtered and shot and those things. We know that in in Memphis, 1866, we see the Memphis riots. We see so many of these incidents occurring, Q, which brings us up to 1877, Q, to 1965, Q. I want us to think about that 100-year period.
Yes.
Throughout that 100-year period, Q, was sheer terror, and it was all different types of tactics that were used to suppress votes. And it was done through convict leasing. Convict leasing was something that was popular, and it began real popular at the end of the 1800s, in the early 1900s. So, Q, they have a concept called slavery by another name. And what would happen, Q, in states like Alabama, Tennessee, they would just go off the street and pick up black men for vagrancy. So if you were a black man, Q, and a white person accused you of being too loud, you could go to prison for with no time limit. And what they would do, Q, they would actually work these men to death. There are mass graves everywhere. And this is what they said. They said when one died, some people call it worse than slavery, Q, because when someone's enslaved, Q, I can't work them to death because I have a financial incentive to keep them alive.
Yep.
But if I have this endless supply of convict labor, I can work them till they physically drop dead and replace them. So why is this important, Q? This is important because it disenfranchised black individuals, and it disenfranchised them to vote. And what we see today, Q, that over 700,000 black, not black, but 700,000 people who have been incarcerated in Florida during the governor's election was not able to vote because of this, because of serving time. This Q has a place back here in the 1877. So what this did, Q, is that people down south were terrorized for a whole year. Now, Q, and this will bring us to today.
Yeah.
So the way that I break this down, Q, is saying that black people in America has had two reconstructions. The first reconstruction was that period of 1865 to 1877 was the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, and individuals exercising their rights to vote and obtain property, economic attainment. So, Q, we are the people, our ancestors, everyone, American, white, black, we had white people that fought very endlessly, just like we see white brothers and sisters in the streets today, protesting George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. So we've always had white brothers and sisters. But here's the thing. So for that 100-year period, Q, black people have been subjugated to all different types of things, a poll tax, literacy test, you name it, any type of tactic. The fear and violence was the first tactic, but if you were able to go through that, you actually would succumb to all of these tactics that I'm going to talk about in a second. So that's the first reconstruction, Q. I like to look at it in a 100-year period, 1865 to 1965. Yeah. And we were trying to exercise the right to vote. Now, Q, we have an R2. The second reconstruction, Q, really took place starting in like 1963, going back to what I talked about with Dr. King, Fannie Lou Hamer, all of these individuals. So Dr. King, Ella Baker, all of these individuals, Malcolm X, they were basically pushing for the agenda and trying to, as Dr. King said, be what you say on paper. They were basically trying to make America come to grips with the ideas, not just the ideas of you, but the actions of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. That's what they were actually doing. So you have R1, the people who, like Frederick Douglass, the people who advocated for the laws, but the laws would not be implemented until 1965. So, Q, when you talk to me or we talk about what is a democracy, a democracy is where citizens feel they fully have the right to exercise their citizenship in a democratic session. So what happened, Q, is those Southern Democrats, and they were called Dixiecrats during the R2 movement, leading up to the R2 movement around 1930, 1940, they were called the South, because the South had the ex-Confederates and those kinds of individuals from Nathan Bedford Park. So what happened, Q, is that when FDR did the New Deal, he struck a deal, a compromise. And a compromise was with the Southern Dixiecrats, as they call it. And one of the people who ran for president, a couple of them, Q, was Strom Thurmond out of South Carolina, George Wallace, who was the governor of Alabama when I was a little boy growing up. And these Democrats actually ran on this kind of what they call a Southern strategy. We're going to come back to that when we get to the Republicans. So what happened, Q, is that a lot of these Southern Democrats left the Democratic Party and they switched over to the Republican Party. And there is where you see the shift. Because in the in the 1800s, it was the radical Republic. All of those Congress people I talked about, Lincoln, Ben Wade, John Bingham, they were what is known as the radical Republicans. That's who actually pushed forward the Constitution, the 13th, 14th, 15th. Now, those Dixiecrats in the 30s and 40s with FDR New Deal, Q, they actually switch. And what happens is that FDR New Deal doesn't reach black people. And some of the things, such as the GI Bill, a lot of black people did not. We talk about the home mortgage,
Yes.
From 1945 to 1970 was the greatest boom and instituted the greatest wealth class in American history. So those Dixiecrats made a deal and made sure that blacks did not get a lot of the New Deal. Because guess who were excluded from those New Deal policies? Agriculture workers, that was mainly black sharecroppers in the South, and domestics, black women working at home. So we were excluded from that queue, and that's when you begin to see the R2, the second Reconstruction people come to bear. Dr. King is born out of this in the late 1920s. Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer, who grew up on a Mississippi sharecropping farm. And they began to articulate, we want the vote. Now, Q, I'm here in Cleveland. 1964 in Cleveland was a landmark year because it was like the hotbed for civil rights and voting. Dr. King and Malcolm X visited Cleveland more than any city during that year. Dr. King, when he would get out of jail in Alabama, he would come here in Cleveland to actually raise money to take back down south, to get people out. And Cleveland, Q, is known as Alabama North because of the Great Migration, Q. A lot of people probably have roots from the Chicago, a lot of those people from Mississippi, but Cleveland is Alabama. That's why Dr. King loved it. Malcolm X goes here, Q. 1964, Q. Malcolm X gives a speech at Corey Methodist Church in a community, Glenville. And it's a largely black community. Once was a Jewish community, and it turned black. And in 1964, Malcolm X comes here, Q. And Malcolm X gives his famous speech, and I think most people say it's his best speech. Q, this is what he labeled it. He labeled it the ballot or the book. The ballot or the book. Give me liberty or give me death. And he basically takes America to task and brings them back to 1776, this liberty that you all went to war for. And you claim that you cherish, you won't even exercise it to me and 22 million of American citizens.
Wow.
So that's a very famous, and he goes on to Detroit. A few days later, he gives that same presentation. And Q, a lot of people think that because of that pressure, civil rights movement, and I go back a little bit, we know Brown versus Boyd. You know all of that, but that civil rights push, Q, really came from around 62 to 65. Almost 100 years after the Civil War and Reconstruction. That's why we call it Reconstruction number 2. And that's why we get the I Have a Dream, March on Washington, 1963, and we get the passage, Lyndon B. Johnson, the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. We see Congress member John Lewis, rest in peace, John Lewis, get his head busted open, bloody Selma, March 7th, 1965, and we begin to see a voter right, the Voting Rights Act of 65 being brought in. So Q, it took 100 years for the law to enforce what the Amendment 15 had pronounced in the 1800s. So we've had this suppression. Now, Q, they weren't done then once the suppression actually, what they call it, Q, they call it like when one type of freedom gets loose, your oppressors are trying to create another type of enslavement. So what happened, Q, is a lot of the Dixiecrats changed parties and they moved to the Republican Party. And the Republican Party, after the 1960s, all of this civil rights and all of the women's lib, the LGBT, we got to talk about 69, Stonewall, And what happens, Q, is that in the 70s, we begin to see the American backlash. Now, I'm going to give the listeners some books that they need to reference. If you want to know about voter suppression, the person that has written the most iconic books on voter suppression is Dr. Carol Anderson. And she has a book called White Backlash. And then she has a follow-up book called One Vote. Let me pull it up here, too, because I want to give the readers, I want to give the listeners the correct title of the book. It's called One Vote, No Vote. And Carol Anderson says this, too. Anytime there's progression, black citizens or people of color, anytime that there is a progressive movement, there is a vicious backlash. Now, let's go to this. So after Reconstruction, Dr. Anderson says, Q, the Ku Klux Klan, lynching, all of those things came out with a force. That was what she called that backlash, the white backlash. In which she said that after the Voting Rights Act, after those things, we began to see what we now call the Southern strategy. What is the Southern strategy, Q? President Nixon was really the first Republican president to exercise the Southern strategy. And a Southern strategy, Q, is where you use dog whistle language. We talked about that earlier. You use coded language. Boy, we see a lot of that today. Right. Coded language to signal a resistance to all of the civil rights gains. So we saw a backlash in the early 70s and 80s. And so Nixon actually started that, and Nixon actually did what we call the law and order president, tough on crime. And we began to see this mass incarceration. And I don't want to start with Nixon. I want to start with Lyndon B. Johnson, because it started during that presidency. But Nixon actually put a kind of pushed it forward. So we began to see these Rockefeller laws. We began to see the heroin epidemic in the 1970s, and we began to see mass incarceration. Now, we're going to move this up to President Ronald Reagan. President Ronald Reagan gave his announcement, announcement for being a nominee in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And Q, that is significant to voting because that is the area where some voters, John Chaney, John s1e2, 3 civil rights, 2 Jewish men, 2 Jewish men and 1 black man were executed by the police and the Klan and shot, killed. And what were they doing, Q? Exercising the right to vote. We know Medgar Evers gets shot in the back. So what he did, Q, he went there to announce his nomination to run for president. Now, I got to bag up Reagan for a minute, okay? Yeah. Reagan was the governor of California, and he was dealing with the Black Panthers at the time. Black Panthers started to exercise their amendment to bear arms. Funny how the Black Panther was seen as a threat, but we have, again, these militias showing up on these steps, and nobody sees that. It's really interesting, black men with guns versus white men with guns. So, Q, what happened out of that context when we talk about it in the frame of voting suppression is that Ronald Reagan was doing dog whistle. And we know what Reaganomics did. And what happened is Reaganomics are still with us today, Q. It started, here it is, Q, in 1964. And there's a guy, Q, who is the architect for what they call the Southern strategy and this backlash that we're seeing today, even in current times. Yeah. Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was an elected official out of Arizona, and he believed in this rugged individualism. He was kind of billed himself as this cowboy. Ronald Reagan kind of emulated that. And he was against all of the civil rights gains. He was against women lives, against LGBTQ, definitely against black. So Ronald Reagan gave a stump speech at his election. I mean, at his when he ran for presidency. And Ronald Reagan called that speech in '64 a time of choosing. Now, what happened to is Barry Goldwater lost that election. And it was just like, it puts us back to the Civil War. Yep. The South lost the war. I mean, they lost the battle, but they won the war. They were able to exploit their land and property and spread propaganda. So Barry Goldwater lost the battle, the election, but they won the war because he would go on to mentor Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, we would see in the 1980s, the crack cocaine epidemic. Yep. All of those things. Now, that moves us to the early 90s with Bill Clinton, because I can't allow Bill Clinton to be off the hook because, when I talk about earlier, we're telling the millennials that you should just vote for the lesser of two evils. Millennials are saying, no, that's not good enough. A lot of people saying that's not good enough. So what Bill Clinton did, Bill Clinton ran as what they call a centrist Democrat. A centrist Democrat, tough on crime, and he basically was courting the centrist votes, and he basically built himself as a president that would be tough on crime. Now, here's the thing, Q. Bill Clinton was a Southern governor of a Southern state. And while he was on campaign, he went back to Arkansas to oversee the deaths and the execution of a individual who was mentally challenged. So he did that. So he did what we call the tough on crime and even with Joe Biden. I got to be critical of everybody, Q. Yep. Joe Biden helped write the crime bill with Bill Clinton. And that's where we got the mass incarceration. That's where we got the crack cocaine, mandatory minimum sentences that you had 1 gram of crack. You would need 1,000 grams of powder cocaine, which is 100 grams of powder cocaine, which was affluent with white households, and the crack was affluent with black. So that locked up a lot of blacks, to destroyed homes, destroyed families, disenfranchised people. Michelle Alexander talks about what that did. Yeah. Now, the first Reconstruction, the second Reconstruction, they put laws in place, and they called that Jim Crow segregation, that everything from the water fountains was segregated. You couldn't go into public entities or restaurants or any of those things. So what this crime bill did to Michelle Alexander said that it is the new Jim Crow, that now you don't have to put color, you don't have to segregate this kind of way. You just segregate people based on being convicted of a criminal charge. So here we have millions of disenfranchised black people and white people and Latino people and Asian Pacific, but primarily black men, Q. There are more black men that was incarcerated, Q. This stat is going to just blow your mind. There are more black men incarcerated in America. America has 5% of the world population, but 25% of the world prisons. There are more black men incarcerated than all of China. China has about 1.4 billion people. There are more black men that have been incarcerated in America than all of the women incarcerated across the world, Q. These are the numbers. So this disenfranchised, this gutting of the black community has rendered a lot of these gentlemen and all of the families, the new Jim Crow, Tupac, one of my favorite artists. Yeah. Tupac had a song called "They Got Me Trapped." That was right. My favorite Tupac song, and Tupac was brilliantly talking about being trapped in an incarcerated community. And in the video, Q, it flashes from Tupac being in a prison cell and being in his community, and it splices it so fast you don't know whether he's in or out, and that's the point that he was making. And Tupac had an album cover, Q, of a little girl who is behind a gated bars in her community, and it's called Trap. And Q, We're seeing the millennials who are the product of that generation of people who saw their fathers, their mothers locked up for so prolonged periods of time, and they come back out. So, Q, this is bringing us up. I know it took me a while to get us here, but Q, this brings us to today. To today, when we're looking at Q, when someone says that there are good people on both sides, when we see neo-Nazis taking a car and driving it into people. And Q, guess what? Guess what happens when we have these issues? We always go back to the Confederate statue. That's interesting, Q. Interesting. And Q, did you know this? There's a thing called the Lost Cause. After the Civil War, the daughters of the Confederacy, these were primarily daughters of Confederate generals. They came together in Nashville, Tennessee, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. In Q, they created what we call a media campaign that we're still living under. They said that so what they did, Q, they put up statues of Nathan Bedford Forrest, of General Robert E. Lee, of all of these ex-Confederate soldiers. Then they went into the textbooks and they made sure that they taught this history, that slavery wasn't a bad thing, and that the South fought for an honorable cause. And the reason why, Q, this has been such a damage is that this 100-year period, we are still operating under these assumptions. People are still voting. People are still denying people a vote because of these myths that this lost cause had. When George Floyd was killed, they immediately went to the General Robert E. Lee statue in Virginia. And they put the Black Lives Matter up there. They put all of those different types of things. So, Q, we're still living with this history. It hasn't gone anywhere. And that's why, Q, voting, getting out to vote, and Q, I don't like to tell people what, I like for people to exercise their right to vote.
Yeah.
And that's why we're where we're at today, Q. That's why it's so charged. Because, Q, if we understood that path, and Q, I know this was a long kind of walkthrough, but Q, we have to understand this history to know why people show up in Wisconsin after Mr. Jacob Blake was shot in the back. Yep. A guy shows up there with an assault rifle and murdered 2 demonstrators. We gotta understand, Q, that we've come from this kind of violence. This violence has been with us. And no more has this violence been with us than voter suppression. So, Q, what are they doing now? Let's talk about now currently. We look at voter disenfranchisement and the stuff now. So what they have done now, Q, they're doing all of these kinds of technological tactics and the things. They're old tricks, but they've just brought them back up to bat. Now, what is happening? Let's even talk about the voting system.
Yes.
The voting system itself has been actually placated as something to be mistrustful of, and this is what I mean by this. When you have a sitting leader that is openly saying, "I don't know if I'm going to trust the mail-in votes," they're planting doubt already. They're planting doubt already, and they're advocating violence. And let me tell you why, Q. And let's break this down to people who are sending in their votes and voting by mail, and why this is going to get complex. So we know, Q, that there's been an all-out assault on the Postal Service. I'm gonna go back a little bit, Q. We know, Q, that the Postal Service, talking about black unemployment, is always double the rate. We know that the Postal Service hires more black people in America than any other job institution.
Yep.
So when we attack the Postal Service, what are we saying? But anyway, Q, we have seen where these entities are showing up and removing mailboxes, the blue block box, mailboxes. They're being removed. True, this isn't anything new. This is something that has actually took place, the vote to President Trump. I'm going to go back to the Obama administration.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to bring up the Shelby versus Holder. Eric Holder, Attorney General, actually filed a case against Shelby County, Shelby in Alabama because of voting disenfranchised. And basically, they were looking at all of those tactics that Alabama law officials were doing. Some of them, Q, were as much as removing the polling places. And as you know, Q, I'm an Alabama guy. I'm a country guy. and Q, I live in Graysville. It's very rural. And sometimes you got to drive 20 miles to get to the nearest voting poll. That was done on a purpose to suppress actual votes. To have somebody have to drive 30 miles in Alabama's a poor state. I come from a poor state. I come from poor people. So Q, asking an individual to get access, no public transportation is not like a city. Having someone drive 30 miles to actually cast their vote is a form, and Dr. Carol Anderson talks about this, and it was a case. Now, Q, we also got to look at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is actually striking down and gutting the Voting Rights Act. So they're gutting what was passed in 1965. They're slowly eroding that. Here's another tactic, Q. Another tactic, Q, is forms of identification.
Yes.
Where you may have an elderly person that's 80, 90 years old, and they don't have their birth certificate. And so when you go to vote, Q, you've been voting all this time, they make you have these forms of ID, and they'll say, you have to have a driver's license. But what if you are an elderly person and never had a driver's license? Or you need to go get an ID? And Q, a lot of states disqualify college ID. Now, Q, it's very interesting when we talk about violence and we talk about this violence and stuff. It's interesting how some states permit individuals who have guns, like if you have a gun license, that could stand as a proof of identification to actually vote. Interesting, Q. We gotta put these pieces together.
Yes.
So these are some tactics that are being actually placated. Now, here's another thing, Q. They're doing what they call purging the rolls. And they used to do this, Q, back in the R2, the 1960s, when people would go to try to vote. They would try to remove your name from the roll. So when citizens show up at the voting place and they will ask you, here's what they did, Q. So a lot of the tactics that they're using in Georgia, the name James Brown. Now, Q, we know that the name James Brown is ethically leaning towards a black person.
Yes.
Okay? So what they'll do, they'll take all of the James Browns and they'll look for initials and match things, and it just gives them a reason to throw out ballots. So if you write on your ballot James such and such Brown and you don't put your initial, that could be grounds for disqualifying you. Q, I want to give your listeners another great book.
Yes.
And this guy is the guru on voter suppression. And his name is, and I want to make sure I'm saying it right, is Greg Paulus. Paulus. And Greg Paulus, Q, I have to actually read this guy a lot because there's some things, Q, I thought I knew, and this guy just showed me how so many people's votes get thrown out. And we're talking millions of votes being just being tossed out. And the book is here. The book is here too. And again, I just think people need to. And here's another thing, Q. Some ballots, so some people want to do down ballot voting where they don't want to vote for the primary presidential candidate. But if you leave that blank, Q, that could disqualify your ballot. There's so many things that can disqualify the ballot, and it's just important that individuals really check, especially if you're doing a mail-in ballot. And another thing, Q, that they do, they keep these long lines. So the lines will be so long that you just take, and what they're trying to do is just basically stop you from exercising your right to vote. So here's another thing. Where I came from, Q, they used to have this early voting called Souls at the Polls. And this was really done with black churches. Where black churches would get together and they would put together their votes and those things. So that is not part of it as well. So I want Q to spell his name because I didn't pronounce the name correctly. Okay. And the gentleman's name that has written books on this, and Q, he knows all of the things. His name is Greg, Greg Palast, Palast. Okay. And he's written quite a few books on voter disenfranchisement, all of the things. And what I like about him, Q, is that he's talking about it in the current state. And here's what he has to say, Q. I just want to share this. He says disproportionately target people of color, since statistically in the United States there is far more name repetition. The main criteria for being flagged as a potential double voter, what I just said, like the name James Brown, on cross-check lists among people of color more than white people. And this is what Palast says, that 25% of white people shared a total of 319 surnames, 25% of black people. And Latinx people have 26 surnames, 2641 surnames, and those kind of things. Now, this is breathtaking right here, Q.
Wow.
And it's important for us to talk about, Q, gerrymandering.
Oh, yeah.
So gerrymandering, Q, is just where you, according to the Census Bureau, they take a look at the population of a community and they redistrict based on the census. That's why you all voting is important, but also filling out the census. And I hope everybody filled out the census because that gives you representation. Yep. And that's how gerrymandering. And you have these gerrymandering kind of areas where the opposition party, and I want to be clear to you because I don't want to tell people what to do. Democrats and Republicans both exercise gerrymandering. And gerrymander is just where you redraw a political geography district for a political favor to try to lean towards your party. Now, here's the thing, Q. It said that the Shelby, I'm going to go back to Shelby, Q, because in 2013, the Shelby County versus Holder, that was the ruling, and the Supreme Court just ruled on that this year, gutted most of the things. It was really dealing with voter ID. But here's the thing, Q, that we all have to pay attention to. What the Shelby versus Holder voter disenfranchisement did, it emboldened what we call the swing state. I'm in a swing state. When we look at the last election, the Electoral College, where you don't win by the popular vote, you win by the carrying certain states based on percentage and those kinds of breakdowns. So the last election, while the Hillary Clinton got, 2 million, I think, more votes than Trump. What happened there is that Trump won the states through the Electoral College, these swing states. So let's put all this together when we talk about voter suppression and why this is important. This is important, Q, because the Shelby versus Holder has emboldened states such as Ohio, North Carolina, Arizona, and Wisconsin. And what these states are doing, they are actually purging the rolls, and they're purging the rolls of individuals disenfranchised. Dr. Martin Luther King, who died for our right, the right to vote, I think it was his cousin, Q. His cousin who had voted in Atlanta at the same precinct, I think she was in her 80s. She went to vote the last time, Q, and she was actually told that her name wasn't on the roll, and she didn't get a chance to vote. And she just was weeping, Q. She said, since 1965, I voted every year, and these people have taken my right to vote. I don't even feel like a human being. They've stripped my dignity, those kind of things. So these are the things, Q, that individuals need to do. So, Q, if you put a piece of Scotch tape or you put a piece of tape on your ballot and you mail it in, that is grounds for your ballot being thrown out. If you use a different type of ink, like red ink, if you don't fill the bubble out complete, all of these things can be grounds for having your vote thrown out. So Q is really interesting. Here's one of the things I did, Q, when I got ready to vote. Downtown in Ohio, I've already voted, but downtown Ohio, Q, they have a main kind of place where you can actually take your ballot in, where it's overseen and those different types of things. But here's what I would advocate, Q, that's even a step better than what I did. A step better than what I did is to actually take the ballot. And again, Q, we want to be safe. A lot of the COVID is out, and we know it's people with pre-existing health issues. And Q, the reason why I did that is that I do have a pre-existing health issue that I can't be, I can't be in those places. But if you really want to make sure that your vote is secured, you can actually take it to your polling precinct and actually deliver it that way, or deliver it in person. So you could do that as a way. But there's a lot of different things, Q, that individuals have to really consider, Q. And Q, they're targeting a lot of the cities in these swing states, like Cleveland, like Detroit. Here's what Palace said, Q. Michigan was decided, Q, by a few thousand ballots from the Electoral College. And Trump won by fewer than 11,000 votes. Get that, Q, the state of Michigan 2016. Largely due to 87 faulty voting machines. Roughly 75%, this is according to Greg Palace, 75,000 ballots in Detroit. And we know where that was a heavily black city, which is nearly 80% black, registered no vote for president. As if those folks came out to cast votes for everything but. So, Q, this is where we're at, and we're at this point of purging. So, Q, they don't do it with and Q, let's go back to the violence. Let's go back to the violence, because the Eufaula, that was straight, that was just a straight massacre where you killed individuals. But if we go back, Q, and if we look at currently today, there are a lot of militia groups. There are a lot of dog whistling that's advocating for individuals to show up at these polls and to actually check. So think about that, Q. You're going to try to vote in this pandemic, and someone is standing there with a assault rifle. Can you imagine, Q, the trigger that has for a person of color for a black person, all of the history there,
Yep.
showing that their great-grandparents were slaughtered, killed, shot, hung, lynched. So, Q, that's a type of intimidation. And here's another intimidation, Q. And Dr. Carol Emerson talks about this when we look at voter disenfranchisement. She goes on to say, Q, that there are other tactics, and it scares people from the polls. So she looks at Ferguson and she talks about Michael Brown.
Yes.
Three-fourths of Ferguson's municipalities were derived, half of them were derived off of tickets that were designated towards black people, individuals in Ferguson. So, Q, when we look at these municipalities, a lot of people don't vote. This is a way of voter disenfranchised because they have fines. And here's the thing, Q, if you go down to try to find out what your total is, or you go there, Q, to tomorrow and say, hey, how much do I owe? They can hold that information and say, hey, we don't know how much you owe. It's so, Q, even if you wanted to say, okay, here's $500, but Q, we know that average American household don't have $500 to pay off, especially in a COVID, so they can't pay their fine off. But even if you could, Q, they could come back and say, well, we thought you owed $500, but it was actually $700. So no checks and balances of this, Q. Also, Q, getting back to that mass incarceration, there's a lot of black men or even men that will show up at the poll and they will get what they call misinformation, disinformation. Misinformation when you're just misinformed, disinformation where it is intentionally erroneous information to cause you to think about something in a different way. So this is what happened in 2016, Q, to suppress the vote. You had a lot of individuals that were going down to try to exercise their right to vote, and there was some polling places where they were sending out literature or even telling people that, hey, if you're behind on your child support, you can't vote, and it even could be grounds for you being arrested. So, Q, can you imagine that you being a poor father does not make you a bad father? We know a lot of these men and mothers have been incarcerated, and they have not had the chance to be in their children's life. But Q, how are they able to pay if they are actually incarcerated? And we know the prison industrial complex, they work people for 40 cents a day, $1 a day. We know in California they have mass incarcerated people fighting fires for $1. That's why I get on all of the politicians. Kamala Harris, that was seen during her time as a prosecutor. We got to take her to task on that. So the thing is, Q, is that a lot of individuals don't vote because of these scare tactics, because we have made it and we have created these barriers to voting. And you best believe, Q, now, Q, this is what I want to end with. We had a festive hour conversation here, Q. I apologize. And Q, your listeners and yourself can cut me off. Y'all can cut me off when you're tired. But I keep going, all right? So, Q, this is good. This is what I want the people to take away from this, and this is a really scary situation. And Q, I'm just hoping that this doesn't occur. But here's the thing, Q. We already know that the election process and the sanctity of it and the reliability of it has been challenged.
Yes.
Through that dog whistle in politics. So here's what should happen, Q. And this is a scenario that I want everybody to be be prepared for, because Q, we could ultimately see violence. Yeah. I do not want to see violence. I am an advocate of nonviolence. I would be a hypocrite because I live the life of Dr. King and I live it to my core. So Q, I am nonviolent, but that doesn't mean, Q, that I can say that it will not be violent.
Yes.
And here's what I mean by the violence, Q. It's a perfect storm. So on the night of the election, Q, I think, Q, over 60% of people who lean towards the Democratic Party will do mail-in ballots. And we know, Q, that all of the mail-in ballots will not be counted on the night of the election. It's going to probably even take weeks. Here's the thing, Q. We know that people who lean conservative probably will have they will have a greater tendency of doing in-person voting, which means, Q, when the cable channels and all of the election polls and all that stuff started to come out, it may look like Trump is ahead of Biden because of that. And then we have to be careful not to call a race, because what could happen, Q, is after all the votes are counted through mail-in ballots, it could show that Biden actually won. Now, here's the dilemma, Q. If you have already planted in a lot of your listeners and followers, people who have demonstrated being violent, if you have planted that in their head that the elections is fraud, I won't get a fair shake, what do you think will happen, Q, if it looks like Trump is ahead on election night and then it turns around, Biden had more votes and actually won the election? It's going to be crafted and seen as fraud. It is going to be crafted and seen as the election was stolen. Thus, Q, I'm very, very concerned. I'm very concerned, Q, on whether or not if Biden happens to win. There are things Trump hasn't said yet that he will actually leave the White House. He hasn't done that. We know that he has used inflammatory language about Proud Boys standing down. So, Q, this is a very contentious, very tense, and very uncertain time that we're in. So, Q, I just want to give your audience that scenario, because that scenario could potentially play out. And again, Q, I don't want to tell anybody, any individual who to vote for. Q, I'm not going to be a poster boy for the Conservative Party or the Democratic Party. I'm going to tell you to vote what's in your best interest, and make sure, Q, that what I want my millennials and people that probably don't feel that there's a reason to vote and stuff, I want you just to consider thinking about whether or not the person has given you something to vote for. And Q, I totally respect that. And Q, I want to say this again, too. Yeah. Because we hear a lot about people saying, well, if you don't vote for Biden, you have to vote for Trump. I don't like that, Q. Number one, that's voter shaming. I don't like to voter shame anybody. And number two, Q, that's making the assumption that someone is entitled to a person's vote and they didn't earn that. So that's my first take on that, Q. I just want people to know that I respect you, whatever option that you solely desire to do as far as voting, exercising your vote. And I want you to remember that. So that's what I want to kind of, Q, get everybody to kind of embrace and get everybody to see, because I don't like the voting shaming. I just don't like that, Q. I don't like, and Q, I know this is probably going to make your listeners, people say, oh my goodness, this guy, it can't be serious. So, Q, I am going to say that where we are, because they said this is unprecedented. This is a election of a lifetime. We've never had this happen. Q, I can't actually subscribe to that because I'm a student of history. And Q, that's why I walk you back all of those years, because Q, the worst president in my kind of understanding. Now, there's plenty, Q. There's a lot of them running neck and neck. I would consider, we got some. I would consider Andrew Johnson the worst president that was the president after Lincoln. He was the worst president that we ever had, and here's why, Q. He had a chance to enforce the 13th, 14th, or 15th Amendment and make this country be. Q, can you imagine if Andrew Johnson had executed those amendments, and Q, if Andrew Johnson had held the South accountable and said, you lost the war, you will now either fall in line and be part of America. But you know what Andrew Johnson did? He didn't do anything, and he allowed the South to actually keep all of their property and all of those things. And he set it up for Rutherford B. Hayes to come in and just remove the rest of those Union troops. So Q, we've had Andrew Johnson, who was a horrific president, and he was from Tennessee, Q. And Q, he believed that black people were inferior and had no place in American democracy. Now, Q, we also had Andrew Jackson, who slaughtered more Native Americans, especially First Nation Native American people in my home state of Alabama, and he forced the forced migration, Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson was a vicious Native American, killer of Native Americans, and he was a devout slave slave holder, believed in slavery, believed that a black had no place. Then we get into the modern time. We have Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, Q, actually is rumored. I haven't found facts, but they said he did comment. Woodrow Wilson was a white supremacist. He was a segregationist, and he actually segregated. He segregated, Q, the government when he actually segregated blacks, and he a lot of blacks lost their job in government positions, and during his cabinet and those different types of things, and the government actions. Now, Woodrow Wilson said this about Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation, that racist movie that actually was a hero movie to the Ku Klux Klan. It predicated a lot of racial stereotypes. The myth of the black racist, the character Gus comes from that. But he said that watching Birth of a Nation is like watching history written in life today, like that. So Q, that's the president. The president. So Q, what do you think he thinks of black folks at that time? He said that the Birth of a Nation is a masterpiece. Okay? So Q, we gotta put things into context of where we are at currently. And we gotta understand that history, because we don't understand that history, we'll get caught up in the moment and say we've never had these times. And the reason why I say that, Q, is that the history allows us to inform the present. What's going on today, and Q, history doesn't repeat itself, it just rhymes. It sounds alike. It has riddles. And it has ways for us to kind of see this rhythmic flow of white supremacy. White supremacy has been around. It's not anything new. It's just the same kind of playbook. And we can't fall like this is something new. And because when we look at it that way, Q, we understand that it is not something new, but it's a continuum of a legacy of white supremacy and voting in this country. And Q, that's what I want to leave your audience with.
No, this is really good. It's what I would love to get some more insight on just right now, because right now our institution is currently working with faculty during these times with kind of like the before and then the aftermath of the election, and kind of the tension within the classroom for faculty. I mean, what would you say to that? One of the things that I was saying, and I say this not to be rude, I say this of someone who lives in a society where anything can happen to me because this is just what it is as being Black. It's like, yeah, we want to do these things. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, this isn't anything new. And this isn't anything new that you shouldn't be doing or shouldn't have already been doing. Like, and I don't want to sound like I'm coming down, but in my mind as a Black person, I want to make that clear. It's like, we have to live this every day. So in my mind, from the lens of this I don't know, like this push to really get into the classrooms and stuff like that, I'm just kind of like, well, in my mind, I'm like, well, we've been doing this. Trump's been president for a while, like this isn't any new kind of rhetoric that we haven't heard or we've experienced. And now that we are at the point of the election, it's kind of like this, what do we do? Faculty is, worried, and I understand it, I appreciate it. But part of me, I'm like, honestly, this isn't anything new.
It's not. It's not, Quinn. You're absolutely right. Quinn, here's what we can just call it what it is. I think for a lot of individuals, they're having a moment of intra-cultural shock. And this intra-cultural shock means that for a lot of individuals, America has seemed like a democracy. And again, too, we got to keep going back to the myth of the Daughters of the Confederate, the myth of the lost cause. It not only buoyed the South, made them feel like they didn't lose and it was a worthy cause, but it also did a job on Northern individuals to make them think that, that the Civil War was fought, the Civil War was won, and we all went happily into the sunset. That's what most people have learned. And what has happened, Q, is that when we have come to politics where you have open white supremacy and you have individuals right in your face, it really, and of course, Q, there are some individuals that want to hear that. They are white supremacists themselves and they embrace it. But there's a large segment of individuals that thought America was a certain way, and now they're having to come to grips with what America truly is. And for us, Q, we're born this way. We understand it, Q. Q, I have sat at the feet of my elders in Alabama, and they've shown me and talked to me about, hey, your granddad had to sleep on the porch because the Ku Klux Klan said they were going to come ride for him. So, Q, we've never been a chance. We've never had a chance. And Q, I got to go to our intellectual who you and I both share is a role model of us, inspiration, and a person we love, Mr. James Baldwin. James Baldwin said this, Q. He said that Black men, such as you and myself, we never have midlife crisis. And somebody asked us, well, what do you mean by that? Ask James Baldwin, what do you mean you don't have midlife crisis? Say Black men don't have midlife crisis because through their lived experience, they figure out very early what America is.
Yes.
So Q, metaphorically, using James Baldwin's metaphor, America is having that midlife crisis, that intercultural culture shock. And when it ruffles in you, you feel so uneasy. You feel like you have to try to do something. I've had my colleagues, I've had individuals come up to me and be like, What is it that we can do? I feel so horrible. I can't believe. And Q, it says that America, the scab has been pulled off the sword. And Malcolm X said this, Q. He said that if a blade is in my back that you have placed in my back and you remove it 6 inches, I can't heal.
Mm-hmm.
You have to you have to remove the blade fully. And Q, America, democracy, and voting has a very, very, very ugly past. Now, Q, here's the thing: we can't get across the bridge till we face it. And Q, until we face that ugliness, we can't heal as a culture and move on to where we need to be as a country.
Yes.
And we honor those principles of democracy. Everybody votes count. We live in a place where that Constitution actually rings and holds a bell. So for Q, for so many hundreds of years, for us, that Constitution was a hollow piece of paper. Mm. And that's what, and so Q, I want to end with, what you asked me to come, but Q, here's what hope I would give colleagues, students. Now they're saying we're on the precipice of a third Reconstruction, Q. They're saying now this third Reconstruction is going to be, we may be in a third Reconstruction. And Q, and somebody say, well, what is the third Reconstruction? Q, it's the same thing that the second one was fighting. It's the same thing that the first one was fighting. And it's basically to make individuals I would love to say, tell Black people that they matter, that they are citizens. But Q, when it takes George Floyd to be on camera, and for millions to see him say he can't breathe and just die there on the ground. That's the kind of intensity it takes for people to recognize that this democracy that we're holding up in this voting and this democracy and those things may rest on very shaky ground. It's not that pillar of cement I thought I was actually standing upon. So Q, for the people who are going to and want to hear white supremacy and they're going to vote for that, they're going to vote for it. We're not going to change those individuals. There's another book I want to get to the deep psychology of why you're not going to change them individuals. There's a book called Dying of Whiteness, and it's a clinical psychologist. And he studied places like in Tennessee. And he found out, Q, that it was in the book he talks about a story of a cab driver, a white gentleman who needs a liver, or I can't remember it, Q. It was a liver or kidney transplant. And Q, he didn't have health insurance, and Dr. Missler begins to tell him, well, haven't you heard about the Affordable Care Act? Like, you can get this surgery. And he was explaining it to him. And the guy told him, Q, he said, no, that's Obamacare. I'd rather die than actually receive anything that is connected to Obamacare. So, Q, that's the psychology you're dealing with. You're dealing with somebody willing to die opposed to use a plan or use something that can save his life. So, Q, that's what we're dealing with when we talk about white supremacy, how deep that is, my brother. We got a long way. So Q, that's one thing. So, but Q, to answer your question about the other individuals in the class who want to do something, Q, we need to create this third Reconstruction. It has to be a third Reconstruction, and that Reconstruction means that we are upholding the democratic values of this country and what this country wrote 1776. And Q, this is where we can bring everybody of different political persuasions. Now, Q, the reason that I excluded white supremacists, Q, is because, Q, we ain't going to, those people, because you really say, well, you got to listen to everybody in the middle of the road. I'm not interested in listening to somebody that is predicated on my subjugation, based on nothing but the color of my skin and my lineage. So I don't. Yes. I'm gonna let somebody else figure that out. But you may have conservatives, you may have Republicans, you may have Green Party, you may have everyone that wants to see America move forward in this third Reconstruction. Mm-hmm. And Q, for the third Reconstruction, to me, is just a platform to have that discussion.
Yes.
You know, Q, and one discussion I would say, Q, that I had a lot of my colleagues and people and friends asking me about George Floyd. They're like, how could that happen? And I said it happened because we don't ever have conversations about reparations. They looked at me, Q, and I said, until America understands reparations, till they understand that what those amendments that I gave you, 13th, 14th, 15th amendments, Q, till you understand a wrong that's been done and you don't see it as something where you're doing something as a suicide for a black person, but you're doing it because an injustice has been done, because we can track and trace George Floyd lineage all the way back to that 1861, where his people were actually enslaved. We can trace his people to the New Deal. We can trace his people to the... So, Q, until we start having these conversations, we're not going to get to that third Reconstruction until we have these conversations about gender equality.
Yeah.
And talking about those things, and talking about, our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and how, is it humane to actually put children in cages, Q? Is that humane, Q? Is that a country that says they're the beacon to the rest of the world, Q? How can we talk about being a democracy and we actually put children in cages? So, Q, these are the conversations. So, Q, that's what I would say. I would say we need conversations and platforms in your center, Q, which you all do that important work, the most important work, I would say, bringing the campus together to have those conversations about what does this third Reconstruction look like. That means we living in a world, Q, where a woman doesn't make 77 cents to a dollar. We living in a world where children, we advocate for children, and we don't buy into that old thing to be seen, not heard. Because when children are silent, we know a lot of abuse occur, and we need to advocate for the least amongst us. And Q, when we go out there and say that third construction means that every person deserves a dignity, a decency to live, a decency, Q, to work 8 hours a day and be able to come home to a family and keep a roof over their head. This is that third Reconstruction, Q, because people who are following the white supremacists. Dr. King said this, Q, when he was in the prison in Alabama, I think it was Alabama, and he seen the guards. He struck up a conversation with some of the white guards, and he said, he started to ask them about their life, their kids. He said, and then the topic came about their income. And Dr. King said when they told his income, he almost fell out. He said, look, you all should be over here on the side behind the bars with us fighting what they paying you. So what the thing is, Q, it's all about dividing people. It's all about rhetoric. It's all about it's all about those things, Q, because we know that poor people, Q, we know that stocks, and we know that we're in a dual economy. People who own stocks and all those things, they're doing well, while the rest of the U.S. population is not doing good. So, Q, we know that about 10 to 15% of individuals of Americans own about 80-some% of the stock. We got to have these conversations, Q. And until, Q, we look at that third Reconstruction, we ain't going to get, we not going to get there. We not going to get there. And that's how I look at it.
Well, I appreciate it, Doc. I really appreciate you for, honestly, I do. Like, this is, it's really great to be able for the listeners to really understand the historical context around this, and that this is nothing new, especially nothing new for Black and brown folk. And, and I think that is really the thing that I really want us to really take away is that, listen, like, this is nothing new for Black or brown folks. And I really think that it's important to understand the historical context and understand why a lot of people are voting, why some people may not vote, and also, like you said, the whole idea of voter shaming and making sure that we really take that into consideration.
Absolutely.
Especially right now, because to be honest, I'm very clear. Like, Biden was not, I'm not feeling him, but, I mean, I'm being honest. Like, when I'm like, I know the historical context of what Biden has done, right? Like, I'm not crazy. So it's like, okay, is anything really going to change? So it's just really important for us all to do our research. It's important for us to always do the research of what
Yes, you're right, Q. That's a great way to say it. And Q, it goes the other way too about the voter shaming, because you so when someone says, "Hey, I'm voting for Biden as the lesser two evils," if they're Democrat leaning, or they say, so Q, it's not my place to try to shame somebody and this is but Q, the reason why I gave that historical context is that I have to give and be fair to show my critique of Biden and to show my critique of Kamala Harris. I have to say, Q, just as a critical scholar, and Q, honestly, there's no way for me to be able to honestly talk about politics or those things and to as a Black man, because so many of my family members and friends, they were impacted by that crime bill. So I can't ignore that. I can't ignore that, Q. And Q, I'm willing to have a conversation with any individual about that. Q, and like you said, we have to have those grounds where we can respect people in their decisions and what their decisions are, and not voter shame. I just don't think that's productive, And Q, when we vote, and when some people vote shame too, they're operating out of a kind of how should I say it, Q? They're operating out of a kind of selfish, kind of elitist kind of way. To suggest that, for me, Q, to go and shame somebody and suggest to them that I know their what they need and for their politics, I can't do that. I can't do that, Q, and I would come across as an elitist, and I don't want to do that. And I want Q just to respect people, and that's what the vote. And Q, that's what we had this conversation about. Q, we were talking about. I know a lot of people probably listening will be like, okay, Q, we were talking about voter suppression. Q, so it's another level where we at. So Q, let's go back to the first level, Q. We would just love Q if people just could go and vote. But there are all of these, so we had to get that. So Q, I think we're in a part 2 talking about the dynamics and the politics around it, the problematic, and that's a whole nother. Q, we just got people that just cannot vote. That's what this was about, just that history of not voting and how voting has always been a contentious and it has always been met with violence. And when we say violence, Q, we're not just talking about men with guns. We're talking about, Q, after 100 years, you have denied me education, and I am illiterate coming out of the Civil War, and you want me to read this Constitution or this poll tax or these texts. So, Q, that's a violent act, to take education away from me and to put this document in front of me and tell me I need to read it. And one thing, Q, to tie this to Reconstruction and education, Reconstruction, that period between 1865 to, some people say 77, that's the Constitution, the amendments. But even beyond that, Q, was the greatest shift in education in America.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the land grant colleges that we know today, education, higher ed, got its birth during Reconstruction.
Yes.
And it owes a debt to that. So, Q, a lot of things with the Great Myth, when we look at the Reconstruction, a lot of times the Daughters of the Confederacy, the myth is that the Reconstruction was a failure. It wasn't a failure, Q, because it were black Congress people. It was also a black governor in Louisiana for a time. So, Q, what happened out of Reconstruction, the reason why it was a failure was because America at that time did not have enough political courage to exercise the things that have been put in place.
Yeah.
Starting with Andrew Johnson, Hayes, withdrawing the troops. So it wasn't that it failed, Q. It failed because of a lack of will.
Yep.
People did not stand up to it. So it didn't fail because that's what Birth of a Nation does. It tried to show like black Congress people in the House of Representatives up with that. And so what that did, Q, that just created this understanding that government or blacks in government is a failure. And it wasn't a failure, Q. It was actually moving towards a success. More education. Black people cut their literacy rate, Q, faster than any individual group of people in human history. They cut it in half, and Q is still like amazing. So we have to look at that, Q. But Q, here's the thing: we gotta be honest, though. We gotta be honest, Q. If we ain't gonna be honest, we gonna continue to veil of pretending that we're in a democracy when we're not. And we gotta do some truth telling. And Q, the reason why I want to talk to you, my young brother, is that I wanted to give you something that was the truth. Because, Q, I don't know if I'll wake up tomorrow or you. Look, I tell my students I love y'all, and I love y'all enough to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the truth. You'll never be able to say Dr. D lied to me. Dr. D always kept it 100. You know. So that's the thing, Q. We just got to be brave enough to tell the truth, and that's hard to do.
Yes, it is. Well, I really thank you so much for being on and having this conversation. It's very enlightening and it's very educational, and it's the truth. And so I really just appreciate you for doing this and being here.
No problem, Quinn, and I want you to continue the great work you're doing and keep pushing this conversation forward. And anybody that listens to this conversation, I want to commend you for just even listening. And we're going to look at that third Reconstruction, because I want to come back to you and talk about the third Reconstruction.
Yes. And as always, I like to leave us out with a quote because it's just what gets our brains going, and one of the quotes today is, I will not have my life narrowed down. I will not bow down to somebody else's whim or to someone else's ignorance. And that is from our amazing Black feminist, womanist professor, social activist, Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks is amazing, and I want us to really take that in as we move forward with these conversations that are very complex. And also just want everybody to tune in next week, where the next conversation is, what is the behavior of an academic Karen? And what does that look like in our institution? So just please make sure that you all tune in, where that conversation will always be fun, educational, and very hard. And so having hard conversations is important. So thank you for listening to the Unheard Outsider, and we will see you all next week. Thank you, Dr. D.
Thank you, sir.
Of course.